Under a pale English sky, amidst the endless greens of Wessex, thick forests of oak, ash and yew cover much of the landscape, their canopies creating deep shadows on the forest floor. Among the trees roam wild boar and deer, hunted by the Saxon elite. Streams cut through the woodlands, offering fresh water and sustenance for the wildlife, while the undergrowth is thick with brambles, ferns and ivy. A young boy named Alfred grows up in a court filled with uncertainty. Born in 849 AD, Alfred is the youngest son of Aethelwulf, king of the West Saxons. He never wanted to be king. Instead, he preferred to study and read poetry. His future seems modest. To his delight, he is unlikely to ever ascend the throne. But history often takes unexpected turns. As his older brothers fall one by one, Athelstan, the King of Kent, was stricken down by a horrible illness which sent shockwaves through the kingdom. Many peasants mourned the king's death and afterwards looked towards a new heir for the throne. Meanwhile, under the shadow of Wessex's throne, a romance stirred that would ignite whispers across the kingdom. Athelbald, the second of the four brothers, now king after his father Athelwulf's death, found himself drawn to the allure of his father's widow, Judith of Flanders. The young queen, barely older than Athelbald himself, had once been the prize of his father's late years, but in her beauty and regal bearing, Athelbald saw more than the relic of his father's reign. Their connection deepened swiftly. Whether from passion or ambition, none could say for certain. To the court, it was a scandal that defied the sanctity of both church and crown. Yet, Athelbald seemed intoxicated by the taboo, as if the very act of claiming Judith with her golden hair and Flemish grace solidified his power in a way mere rulership could not. In defiance of tradition and whispers of outrage, Athelbald took Judith as his wife. Their union, a political storm draped in the thin veil of love. Athelbald died too of a sudden illness, as if it was punishment from God himself for violating the church. Upon Athelbald's untimely death, the mantle of kingship passed to Athelbert, who ascended to the dual thrones of Wessex and Kent. Yet, the weight of his rule bore a striking contrast to the tumultuous lives of his brothers, for Athelbert's reign unfolded in a landscape marked by uncertainty rather than grandeur. The spectre of Viking raids loomed ominously over southern England, casting a pall of anxiety over his subjects. Though his days were less coloured by battles and scandal, he navigated a kingdom rife with unrest, implementing defensive measures to safeguard the lands from relentless marauders. With each passing season, the Danes grew bolder, striking fear into the hearts of the people as they breached the shores and plundered villages. Athelbert stood firm at the helm of Wessex, his resolve tempered by the reality of an unquiet kingdom. Yet the echoes of his brother's legacies remained. Each step he took was shadowed by the tales of glory and strife that preceded him. In the year of 865, Aethelred ascended to the throne, stepping into the eye of a storm as the Viking Great Heathen Army cast its dark shadow across the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. A sense of urgency defined his reign, for the clamour of swords and the echo of distant horns heralded an invasion that would test the mettle of his people. Side by side with his younger brother Alfred, Aethelred became a stalwart defender of Wessex, leading his forces into a series of grueling engagements where blood and valour intertwined. The famed Battle of Ashdown became a crucible for the brothers, a fierce clash against the relentless Danes that demanded both strategy and bravery. Yet, as the winds of war howled and the clash of arms rang in the air, fate bore down heavily upon Aethelred. In 871, after a punishing battle at Meratun, he succumbed to injuries sustained in the fight, his body weary and broken from the trials of war, or perhaps laid low by the illness that gripped him afterward. His passing sent shockwaves through the realm, leaving Wessex vulnerable at a moment of peril, and unwittingly set the stage for Alfred's rise. Alfred by then had grown from a boy to a man, and his destiny shifted in a way that would change England's fate forever. By 871, he was crowned King of Wessex, facing a relentless enemy, the Norsemen. Alfred's kingdom is surrounded by Viking raiders, Danes from across the seas who have already claimed much of England. Mercia has fallen. Northumbria burns. Wessex, Alfred's home, now stands as the last bastion of Anglo-Saxon resistance. The kingdom is fragile, hanging by a thread, but Alfred is not merely a warrior. He is a man of wit and strategy, and he will soon prove to be as skilled in governance as he is in battle. Alfred's court at Winchester becomes a place of planning and learning. His personality is a blend of pragmatism and vision. Unlike other kings of his time, who might have relied solely on brute force, Alfred was deeply intellectual, valuing education, justice, and piety. In the king's early life, his mother introduced him to poetry, which likely contained ideas of generosity, kindness, and told tales of heroic battles. As a young man, he travelled to Rome, where he fell in love with reading, writing, and God. He was introspective, often battling illness, believed by some to be Crohn's disease or a similar affliction. Despite his meek appearance and physical weakness, Alfred's mental acuity would define his reign. He harboured a profound respect for learning, recognising that knowledge was not merely a tool for personal advancement, but a foundation for a stable and prosperous realm. As Viking invasions ravaged the land, Alfred understood that an educated populace would be better equipped to defend their homes and uphold the values of their society. He sought to revive the sagging standards of literacy, inviting scholars and clerics to his court, creating an atmosphere where the written word flourished once more. However, Alfred knew that to defeat the Vikings, he would need more than swords and shields. He needed unity. But uniting the fragmented kingdoms of what would later become England was no easy feat. There were Anglo-Saxon lords who doubted Alfred's ability to lead, and others who saw opportunity in the chaos to claim more land for themselves. Alfred also faced regional dissension, where old rivalries between Mercia and Wessex boiled just below the surface. But Alfred was patient, careful. He rebuilt the political alliances of his father, marrying his daughter to the ruler of Mercia and bringing once independent factions into his fold. Still, the immediate threat was the ever-terrifying and barbarous Viking horde. What would next befate Alfred the Great? In 878, the bitter grip of winter, the dawn broke over Wessex with a frigid stillness, the air sharp and biting against the skin. Frost blanketed the earth like a glistening shroud, each blade of grass encased in delicate crystals that caught the weak sunlight, transforming the landscape into a shimmering expanse of white. The skeletal trees, their branches stripped bare by the unforgiving winds, stood sentinel against the horizon, casting long skeletal shadows over the frozen fields. Smoke curled lazily from the thatched roofs of the village huts, a sign of life flickering within the chill, where families huddled together, seeking warmth beside crackling hearths. As the sun crested the distant hills, its weak rays struggled to penetrate the thick grey clouds that hung low in the sky, promising more snow to come. The quiet was punctuated only by the distant cawing of crows, scavengers searching for sustenance in the stark landscape. The Danes, led by the ruthless Guthrum, launch a surprise attack in midwinter, taking Alfred and his forces off guard. The West Saxons scatter, their king forced into hiding in the boggy and disease-infested marshlands of Somerset. It is here, in these dark days, that the legend of Alfred takes shape. Tired, hungry, isolated and alone, the legend goes that Alfred takes refuge in a peasant's hut, where he is tasked with watching over some cakes baking in the hearth. Distracted by his thoughts of reclaiming his kingdom, Alfred lets the cakes burn. The peasant woman, unaware she is scolding her king, chastises him for his negligence. Alfred, taking on board the woman's criticism, then apologises profusely. This moment captures the humility of Alfred, a king who understands the trials of a common man. But it is not just a tale of burnt cakes that makes this moment significant. It is Alfred's resolve. From these marshes, he rallies his people. A secret fortress is constructed at Athelney, where Alfred gathers an army, forging new tactics for guerrilla warfare. The Vikings, accustomed to open battles and quick raids, find themselves caught off guard by Alfred's strategy. In May 878, Alfred emerged from the cesspit that was the marshes, leading his rebuilt army into battle. At Edington, a small Wessex village, the fates of two nations collide. Alfred's forces, hardened by months of struggle and bloodthirsty with revenge for their fallen comrades, Alfred faces Guthrum the Butcher's army in a brutal clash. The West Saxons prevail. The Danes are defeated. But Alfred, unlike his army, doesn't seek mere revenge. Instead, he wants to put a stop to the endless violence and proposes peace, a radical act in an age of endless war. After Edington, Alfred offers terms to Guthrum. The terms of peace between Alfred and Guthrum were etched into history like a fragile thread stitching together two fractured worlds. After years of brutal conflict, when sword and shield had spoken in violence, a quiet agreement now sought to steady the tides of war. This treaty, solemnly confirmed with oaths, bound not only the living but also the unborn, as both kings pledged to secure the favour of God and the fragile peace that their peoples so desperately needed. It was more than a truce between men. It was a vow to safeguard the future. The first pillar of this agreement was the boundary that would separate the English and Danish realms, a line drawn across the landscape of southern England. The border was to follow the River Thames, then trace the Lee up to its source, winding to Bedford before cutting along the course of the River Ouse, all the way to Watling Street. A line not just on a map, but a demarcation between two cultures, two ways of life, now forced to coexist. More than just land was at stake, however. The lives of the people were woven into the fabric of the treaty, with a solemn declaration that whether English or Dane, the blood of a slain man would be valued the same. 8 half-marks of pure gold would serve as recompense for a life taken, except for commoners and freedmen, whose value was set at 200 shillings, a stark reminder that even in peace, the worth of a life could be measured. Justice, too, was outlined, shaped by the structures of rank and allegiance. If a king's thane was accused of homicide, he could clear his name only with the oaths of 12 fellow thanes, an ordeal of loyalty and honour. Lesser men, too, would need their equals to vouch for them, binding the communities in networks of trust. And if the accused failed to defend himself, the penalty would be severe, threefold the value of the stolen property. The law would not bend. Even trade, once a silent casualty of war, was tentatively revived. No man, whether slave or freeman, was to pass from one land to the other without permission. Yet, if necessity called and trade became inevitable, it would proceed under strict terms. Hostages would be exchanged, a human guarantee of peace, and proof that treachery would find no harbour under this fragile pact. In these words, Alfred and Guthrum did not just settle a score, they carved out the rules of a new world, one where battle-worn lands could breathe again, if only for a time. The peace they struck was as much a shield as it was a sword, defending what remained, even as it guarded against the possibility of future strife. The Treaty of Wedmore is signed, not merely as a ceasefire, but as a blueprint for coexistence. Guthrum is baptized as a Christian, symbolizing a new beginning for the Vikings under his rule. In return, Alfred secures the borders of Wessex and establishes the Danelaw, a region in eastern England where the Danes could rule under their own laws. This agreement is one of the most remarkable twists in Alfred's reign. Rather than try to annihilate his enemies, Alfred chooses diplomacy. He understands that the Vikings are too powerful to destroy entirely, and many Saxon children would lose their fathers in the process. Instead, he reshapes England into 2 halves, one Saxon, one Danish, but under a fragile peace. This treaty marks the beginning of a more stable England, but it will require careful stewardship to last. Alfred knows that defence is the key to survival. The Viking threat, though diminished, is far from extinguished. In the years that follow the Treaty of Wedmore, Alfred embarks on an ambitious programme of military reform. He creates a network of fortified towns known as burhs. These burhs still exist till this day, two examples being Oxford and Buckingham. The burhs are strategically placed across Wessex, connected by roads, each within a day's march of another. This allows for quick communication and defence, giving the people of Wessex a sense of security they had never known before. But Alfred does not stop at land defences. He understands that the Vikings control the seas, so he commissions the construction of a fleet of ships, longer, faster, and more manoeuvrable than the Viking longships. Alfred's navy was the start of what would become one of the most powerful navies in the world. It would become one of his greatest legacies, repelling raids along the southern coast and ensuring that the seas around Wessex remain under his control. These innovations in defence are not only military strategies, they are reflections of Alfred's personality, a king who values preparation, foresight, and the protection of his people. Beyond the battlefield, Alfred seeks to elevate his kingdom through knowledge. He laments that many of his clergy and nobles cannot read or write, so he initiates a cultural revival. He invites scholars from across Europe to his court, including the renowned Welsh monk Asser, who would later pen Alfred's biography. Alfred commissions the translation of essential Latin texts into Old English, ensuring that his people can access knowledge that had long been locked behind the barrier of language. Not content with being a passive patron of learning, Alfred himself takes part in these translations. The pastoral care of Pope Gregory and the consolation of philosophy by Boethius are among the works that Alfred ensures will influence his subjects for generations to come. He believes that wisdom and piety are as crucial to a kingdom's survival as swords and shields. He issues a law code that blends Christian ethics with traditional Anglo-Saxon customs, creating a legal framework that is both just and accessible to his people, and is the foundation of the British legal system today. By the time of Alfred's death in 899, he has transformed Wessex from a fragile kingdom on the brink of collapse into a bastion of strength and learning. His vision extends beyond his own reign. His son, Edward the Elder, and later his grandson Athelstan, would build on his foundations, eventually leading to the unification of England. Alfred's legacy lives on, not just in the fortresses and fleets he built, but in the very fabric of English identity. He is remembered as Alfred the Great, the only English monarch to bear that title, a king who was as comfortable with a book as he was with a sword. His reign marked the dawn of England as we know it, a land where diplomacy and wisdom could triumph over force, where education could be a weapon against chaos. If you enjoyed this recount of history, don't forget to like and subscribe, as it helps small channels like ours grow, and let us know what type of content you would like to see next.